Welcome to my channel English Learning Zone. I am Ryan. Have you ever walked through a big city and looked up at the tall buildings and thought, who built all this? Who were the first people who lived here before the noise, the lights, and the traffic? Today, we are going to travel back in time. Not just a few years, but hundreds of years to a time when there were no skyscrapers, no taxis, no crowds, only trees, rivers, and open sky. Can you imagine that? A small island, quiet and green, surrounded by water. The wind moving through tall grass. Birds flying freely over the Hudson River. That island, believe it or not, is where New York City stands today. It's hard to believe, isn't it? When we think of New York now, we think of Times Square, bright lights, yellow cabs, and people rushing everywhere. But once upon a time, this busy city was just a peaceful land home to Native American tribes who lived close to nature. They hunted, they fished, they built small homes from wood. There were no machines, no concrete, no noise, just the sound of waves and animals in the forest. And then, everything changed. One day, strange ships appeared in the distance. People from faraway lands came to this island not for a visit, but to stay. They brought tools, clothes, and languages that the local people had never seen before. They didn't know it, but they were about to start a story that would change the world forever, the story of New York City. This is not just a story about buildings and roads. It's a story about people, dreamers, traders, workers, and leaders who built this city step by step. It's a story about change, about hope, and about how one small place became the heart of a nation. So stay with me till the end, because in this video, we'll discover how a quiet green island turned into the city that never sleeps. You'll learn how the Dutch, the English, and people from all over the world helped shape New York. You'll see how it grew through war, peace, and progress. And as you listen, remember this is not just history. This is a lesson about life itself, how everything big once started small. Now, let's begin our journey. Back to the very first days of New York. Chapter 1, Day 1. From forest to first settlement. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. No buildings, no cars, no roads, just green forests, tall trees, and wide rivers shining under the sun. This is how the island of Manhattan looked about 400 years ago. It was not called New York then. It had no skyscrapers, no lights, and no sound of traffic. It was a quiet, peaceful place home to a group of people called the Lenape. The Lenape were Native Americans, the first known people to live in this part of the world. They didn't have cities or factories. They lived in harmony with nature. They built small homes made of wood and animal skins. They hunted deer in the forest and fished in the rivers. Their lives were simple but full of meaning. They believed the land, the water, and the sky were gifts from nature, not something to be owned or sold. Everything was shared among the community. Life was calm for hundreds of years. The Lenape knew the land well. They knew which plants were safe to eat and which were good for medicine. They traveled by canoe through the Hudson River and traded with other tribes. To them, Manhattan was not an island to conquer, it was home. But one day, something new appeared on the horizon. Ships. Big ships with tall sails, moving slowly across the water. On those ships were men who spoke a language the Lenape had never heard before. They were Dutch settlers, and the year was 1624. The Dutch did not come for war. They came for business. They wanted animal furs, especially beaver skins, which were valuable in Europe. In those days, people in Europe used fur to make hats and coats, and they would pay a lot of money for it. The Dutch saw that the Lenape had access to forests full of animals. To them, this was an opportunity to make profit. So the Dutch decided to build a small settlement, a trading post at the southern tip of Manhattan. They called it New Amsterdam. It was small at first, only a few wooden houses, a fort for protection, and a dock for ships. But it was the beginning of something huge. The Dutch brought with them new tools, clothes, and goods. They traded with the Lenape, exchanging metal tools, knives, glass beads, and cloth for animal skins. For the Lenape, these shiny new things looked interesting, but they didn't understand how valuable their land would soon become. And then came the moment that has become one of the most famous stories in New York's history. The Dutch bought Manhattan Island from the Lenape for goods worth about $24, not in cash, but in simple trade items like beads, cloth, and metal tools. Of course, the Lenape did not think they were selling their land forever. In their culture, land could not be owned by one person. They believed they were sharing it. But the Dutch saw it differently to them. The island was now theirs. This was one of the biggest misunderstandings in history, and it changed everything. As New Amsterdam grew, it began to look more like a small European village. There were farms, markets, and wooden houses with slanted roofs. People spoke Dutch on the streets, and they prayed in small wooden churches. The settlement was still small, maybe only a few hundred people, but it was full of energy and trade. Ships came and went, bringing goods from Europe and carrying animal furs back to Amsterdam. Life, however, was not easy. Winters were cold, and food was not always enough. Some settlers became sick, and the forests were full of dangers. But they stayed. They worked hard and built stronger houses. Slowly, New Amsterdam began to grow into a community. For the Lenape, life started to change. The forests they once hunted in were now being cleared for farms. More Europeans were arriving every year, bringing new customs, new religions, and new rules. The Lenape way of life began to fade as they were pushed further away from their homeland. Yet, even in these early years, something magical was happening. People from different parts of the world began to live together in one small place. Dutch, German, African, and Native American people all shared the same land. Even though their lives were very different, it was messy, sometimes unfair, but it was also the beginning of a city that would one day welcome people from every corner of the earth. If you walked through New Amsterdam in those days, you would see narrow dirt streets, horses pulling carts, and the smell of the sea everywhere. You'd hear a mix of voices, Dutch traders talking loudly, children playing near the fort, and the sound of hammers building new homes. The city was alive, growing, and learning. This was day one of what would become New York City, a day when two worlds met, one ancient and natural, the other ambitious and modern. Neither side knew it, but they had started something that would change history forever. So from a quiet forest filled with the sounds of birds and rivers, a small wooden village was born. It was not perfect, it was not peaceful for long, but it was the first spark of the city we know today. And that is how New York began, not as a dream, but as a trade that built one of the greatest cities in the world. Now, let's move forward in time to the moment when another power arrived, ready to change the city's name, its flag, and its destiny. Stay with me, because in the next chapter, we'll see how New Amsterdam became New York. Chapter 2. The English Take Over. The year was 1664. The small Dutch town of New Amsterdam had been growing slowly for 40 years. Wooden houses stood along dirt roads. Ships came and went, carrying furs, spices, and sugar. The people were busy trading, farming, and building their new lives on the edge of a wild land. They spoke Dutch, prayed in small churches, and followed Dutch laws. Life was not easy, but it was peaceful. Then one summer morning, everything changed. Far out in the harbor, 4 large English warships appeared. Their sails were high and white, and their cannons pointed toward the small Dutch settlement. The people of New Amsterdam watched in fear. The English had come to take over the colony, and they came with power. The Dutch governor, Peter Stuyvesant, was a strong man with a wooden leg and a proud heart. He wanted to fight. He believed this was Dutch land, built by Dutch people. But the townspeople were tired of conflict. They had families, farms, and businesses to protect. They didn't want war. They begged Stuyvesant to surrender. And so, without a single cannon being fired, the English took control of New Amsterdam. They renamed it New York, after the Duke of York, the brother of England's King Charles II. The Dutch flag came down, and the English flag rose over the fort. The streets stayed the same, but the language, the laws, and the future of the city changed forever. At first, the people were confused and worried. Would the English throw them out? Would they lose their homes? But surprisingly, the English allowed most things to stay the same. The Dutch people could still live there, trade, and work. They just had to accept the new rulers and pay taxes to the English crown. Over time, English became the main language. The new government used English law. Churches began holding services in English, and official documents were written in the new tongue. The city began to look and sound different. But the most important change was not just the flag or the name, it was direction. Under English control, New York started to open up to the wider world. The English had a much larger empire than the Dutch. They had colonies in the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia. That meant more ships, more trade, and more chances for growth. New York suddenly became part of something bigger, the British Empire, and business exploded. Ships carried sugar, coffee, rum, and goods from one side of the Atlantic to the other. Merchants became rich. The harbor was always full of ships, and the sound of trading filled the air. The English brought their customs, clothes, and ideas, but New York didn't lose its mixed identity. People from all over the world continued to arrive. Germans, Africans, Jews, Irish, and French settlers came looking for opportunity. The city became even more diverse. You could walk down one street and hear 5 different languages. One corner smelled of Dutch cheese, another of English tea, and another of African spices. It was noisy, colorful, and full of life. This mix of people created something new, a city of immigrants, where everyone brought their own traditions, foods, and dreams. Even though New York was under English rule, it did not become a British-only city. It became a place where differences began to blend together. Spike moment. The first public market opened. Farmers and traders came to sell fish, vegetables, and meat. People met in these markets to talk, share stories, and exchange news from faraway lands. The marketplace became the heart of city life. The English also improved the city's structure. They built better roads, stronger houses, and larger ships. They introduced new ways of business banking, insurance, and contracts. They started small industries like shipbuilding and printing. The city was changing from a quiet village to a busy port town. But not everything was fair or peaceful. With English rule came slavery. Enslaved Africans were brought to work in homes, farms, and docks. They were forced to build the city's foundations quite literally. Some of New York's oldest buildings, walls, and streets were built by enslaved people. This dark side of the city's history is important to remember. The same place that promised freedom and opportunity also took freedom away from many. Still, even in hardship, people dreamed. New York had something special, a sense of possibility. Even if life was difficult, there was always a chance to start again, to make money, to build something new. By the late 1600s, New York was growing fast. It was no longer just a trading post, it was becoming a true city. Houses were made of brick instead of wood. Taverns and shops appeared everywhere. A small printing press began publishing news, and people started to feel connected. The city was alive with voices: English, Dutch, African, French, and Native American. And if you walked through New York at night in those days, you would see small oil lamps shining in windows. The air would smell of wood smoke and food. You'd hear the sound of ships creaking in the harbor, and maybe a fiddler playing music in a tavern. It wasn't a quiet village anymore, it was a growing city. A city that was learning to never sleep. The English takeover was more than just a political event. It was a turning point in the identity of New York. It made the city part of a global network. It opened doors to trade, culture, and new ideas. It also introduced problems: inequality, slavery, and class divisions that would take centuries to fix. But one thing was certain. New York was no longer just a small town on the edge of a wild continent. It had become a vital part of the modern world. It had a new name, a new ruler, and a new purpose: to grow, to trade, and to connect people from every corner of the earth. And as ships continued to arrive, carrying goods and dreams, the city kept expanding street by street, dock by dock. The forest was long gone. The farms were turning into neighborhoods. And the people? They were changing too, from settlers and traders into something new, New Yorkers. In the next chapter, we'll see how this new English city faced its biggest test yet: war, revolution, and the fight for freedom. Stay with me, because that's when the real drama begins. Chapter 3: Revolution and Freedom. The story of New York took a dramatic turn in the 1770 seconds. By now, the city was full of energy ships, filled the harbor, trade was booming, and people from many nations lived side by side. But something was changing deep inside the hearts of the American colonists. They were growing tired of British control. The English government made the laws, took the taxes, and sent orders from across the ocean. The people in America wanted something new: freedom. At first, it started as talk. People gathered in taverns, in churches, and in homes to discuss their rights. They asked questions. Why should we pay taxes to a king who lives thousands of miles away? Why don't we have a voice in our own government? These questions spread from Boston to Philadelphia to New York. Soon, talk turned into protest, and protest turned into revolution. New York was in the middle of it all.